This is episode 222. No, sure. For some reasons? Yep. Okay. Well, if I could assume, of course. Until you know this. So, if you could assume, Julie? Of course. Until you know this. Wait a minute. I did not expect to be there. I know, right? If you could assume. Yep. Because I am. No, sure. I know, right? So, if you consume. Yep. Because I have no idea. For some reasons. Oh, you have a good point. Because I said so? Right. Because I was gonna be sure. I know, right? If you consume. Yep. Because I'm not sure of that. It does, definitely. Because you sure? Yep. If you consume, Julie. Until you know this. Right? So if you consume. Yep, it does usually. Of course. Until you notice. Nope, if you consume. Right. I did not ruin that. I know, for some reason, visually. Until you didn't notice. Right, are you sure you realize that? If you consume visually? Of course. So if you consume. Yep, if I consume Julie. Until I didn't know this. I know, right? So, if you consume Julie. Until you didn't know this. Yep, if you consume, definitely. Of course. Did I realize that? Yep, if you consume. Because I was gonna make sure, isn't? Because I said so. Right. I did not spoon that. I know, for some reasons, but if you consume. Yep, it might be because I have no idea. Of course, you're not sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume, Julie. Until you know this. Right? So, if you consume. Yep, for some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course. You're not sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume, Julie. Until I didn't know this, right? So, if you consume. Yep, until I didn't know this. So, if I consume, right? It does, Julie. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume, Julie. Until you know this. Right, are you sure you realize that? Well, it does definitely. I got a good point about them, Vigili. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? It does definitely. But if you consume Vigili? Of course. Because you have no idea. I know, right? So, if you consume. Yep. For some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course. You make sure you realize that. Yep, if you consume Glee. Until you notice. Right, are you sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume Glee. Until you notice. Right. Are you sure you realize that? Yep. If you could see eventually. Until I didn't know this. Right. Are you sure you realize that? Yep. If you could see eventually. Of course. Until I get some ideas. Right? Well, if you assume. Yep. Because I am no sure visually until you notice. Right. Are you sure you realize that visually? Well, it does definitely. But if you consume visually, of course you have no idea. It does definitely. Because I am now sure. For some reasons, it does definitely. But if I consume, right? It does definitely. If you consume, yep. For some reasons, I have no idea. Of course. For some reasons, yep. If you consume, Julie. Until you notice. Right. Because I was giving sure. For some reasons, yep. If you consume, of course. Until you notice. Nope. If you consume, right. I did not spoons that. I know. For some reasons, if you consume, of course. Until you notice. Nope. Okay. No sure you realize that, isn't? Well, if you consume. Yep. I didn't know you realized that. Of course. I have no idea. Well, I was gonna make sure. For some reasons. Yep. Because I am no sure. For some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course. Do you realize that? Yep, if you consume Julie. Until you didn't notice. Right, are you sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume Julie. Until I didn't notice. Right? Until I didn't notice. Yep, if you consume. Course. Because I am not sure for some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course. No sure you realize that. Yep, if you consume. Oh, it does visually. Until we didn't notice. Right. You're not sure you realize that. For some reasons. Oh, it does visually. Until I didn't notice, right? Well, if you consume. Of course. Until you didn't notice. Nope. If you consume. Right. I did not realize that. I know, right? So if you consume. Yeah, yep. If I consume Julie. Until I didn't notice, right? If I consume Julie. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Right. Yep, no, yeah. Of course. You make sure you realize that. It does, definitely. But if you consume. Yep. Cause I have no idea. Of course. For some reasons, but I'm not sure. For some reasons, I have no idea. Until you notice. Yep, if you could simply. Until you notice. Right? So, if you consume. Yep, until you notice. Right? If you consume. Yep, until you notice. Right, I did not spoon that. Of course. Sure you realize that? Yep, if you consume, Julie. Until I notice, right? Of course, you have no idea. Well, for some reasons, yep, if you consume, of course, until you notice. I know, right? So if you consume, yep, it might be, because I have no idea. Of course. Until you notice. I know, right? Yep, if you consume, of course. No idea, right? Yep, if you consume, of course. Because you have no idea, right? Yep. Okay. If you